Good Wednesday morning. This is a good Wednesday morning. This is a great text from Matthew. It shows you right within the gospel, right within the apostles, there is the vanity of power, the search after power. What it must have been murder at the early church, these guys to convert, as it were. This is the early church, even though they had by the time they're writing this gospel, they've got the crucified Christ, okay? Christ is long dead and risen, okay? This must be 30 years later, but there's an inner struggle in the church itself. I think the apostles must have been jockeying with you for power. I mean that. That's what this text says. I'll show it to you, okay? I accept it, I respect it, but it's false, it's wrong, but it's human. The human heart is treacherous. It's one of the texts we'll see this week, if I haven't skipped it already, that the human heart is treacherous. And we so easily betray the excellence of what we've been called to. I think we'll see. I hope I didn't skip it already, because I love it when there's a line in this that the human heart is so treacherous. You see? It can betray us. See? Watch what he says. As Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, you always know up to Jerusalem means the crucifixion. It's a saying, okay? He took the 12 disciples aside by themselves, and he said to them, "Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests, scribes, and they will condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and scourged and crucified and be raised on the third day." That's formulaic. It's most likely a saying that was locked into the early Christian community. It's formulaic. Did he actually say? I don't know if he said it or not. I don't even care, okay? It's a formula. That's the gospel right there. See? That's a Paschal mystery with a vengeance right there. Who and what is Christ? He's called to the crucified, died, and risen. You see? Then here comes the kicker line. This is the neat part. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee approached Jesus with her sons and did him homage, wishing to ask him for something. And we would say in the neighborhood, she's looking for a favor. Okay? I could say it better than the gospel, but I shouldn't say those things. He said, "What do you want? What do you wish?" He's so sweet. She answered, "Commanded these two sons of mine sit, one at the right, the other on your left, in your kingdom." See, you want power. Jesus said in reply, "Do you know what you're asking for? Can you drink the chalice I'm about to drink?" They said, "We can." He said, "My God, you're going to." He replied, "My chalice you will indeed drink, but sitting at my right and my left is not mine to give, but is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." When the 10 had heard this, they became indignant at the two brothers. Jesus summoned them and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and the great ones make their authority over them felt. It's not supposed to be so among you." Imagine that. Think about 30, maybe late first century, when the inner struggles of the church at that time. "Rather, whoever wishes to be great among you shall be your servant." Think of John the 23rd, Servus Servandi, servant of the servants. "Whoever wishes to be great among you shall be your servant, and who wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. Just so the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many." That's the formula, you see? It's the essence of servant leadership. He's Christ. He came to serve, not to be served. He's the Son of God. He came not to be served, but to serve. God chose himself to be the servant. Isn't that neat? Servus Servandi Dei, servant of the servants. It's a great text. I looked up. Well, the mom, John and James' mom, was looking after her kids, and she sees a power base. She sees them as being top dogs. See? So normal. So normal. But so self-destructive at the same time. It's, in a sense, it's a false ambition. See? That's a false ambition, but it's as normal. It's as normal as Adam and Eve. It's as normal as human beings. Yeah. Again, remember I mentioned yesterday the difference between Hobbes and Aristotle. That's such a fundamental. Aristotle sees the role of the community, of service, friendship rather, you see. Hobbes, power. In a sense, the mother of the two boys here see it as powers. When you sit in the right hand and the left of the aristocratic king, you got muscle. You got real muscle. That's power. You're not there to serve. You're there to be the leader, you see? That's what she wants for her sons. He says, okay, but can you drink of the cup I'm about to drink of? They, in fact, will. See? In different ways, they will be martyred. Well, John's not martyred, lives to be old, but his brother will be martyred. They do taste the blood of the cross. They do. They drink of that cup. You see? They do. They changed the world, not because they were men of power, but because they were crucified with Christ, indirectly, but through martyrdom. It's the blood of the apostles that witnesses to the truth of the gospel. It was the blood of the martyrs, the blood of the apostles to change the world. It wasn't muscle. It was exactly the opposite. And I think the church is best when she is not Lord and Master, but the servant of a culture. I think she's been called to that right now in a very special way, being honest with you. I'm not going to rule anybody's life, but nor should she ever. Power corrupts. What's that line? Power corrupts, absolute power absolutely corrupts. The church is best when she is not in power, but when she's maybe even so persecuted, because then out of her blood and her suffering, she witnesses the crucified love of Christ, and she witnesses to the world. Church is never in good shape when she's too comfortable, when she's too powerful. She's always best when she has to live the life of the cross. That is really true. When she wets herself with power, and she has for centuries, she also bred corruption within the church. Who are more corrupt than the popes over history and the bishops and clergy? You know, over the course of history, especially the closest they came to power, the greater the corruption. That's why it's very interesting in that regard. The great reformers of the church were not the clergy, they were the women. By not being part of the power base, they themselves were the authentic voice of the church. That's the truth. It's a monastery saying. Boy, the monasteries are great places. You want to understand Christianity on a raw level. You live monastically. You get there's a lot of truth. The old monks have seen it all, done it all, heard it all, okay? They're great confessors of the world. And they say, well, the church saves the world despite the clergy. God saves the world despite the clergy. I'm not knocking the clergy. I'm knocking the image of it, especially as I recall it, being in the 50s, where it was part of a social hierarchy. It was a powerhouse, but especially the episcopacy and the papacy. These were men of power, but were they servants? The first great servant in that office was John the 23rd. He was a servant of the servants. I think Francis is. He makes a lot of people nervous at the church. Why? Because he's a servant, and he acts like one. He thinks like a servant, you see? I think Pope Francis is magnificent, actually, being honest with you. Because he hasn't got any trappings of power at all. He'd stumble on himself if he tried. He's a servant of the servants. And that's the truth. And that's really the truth. I'm just thinking out loud right now. Yeah. The mother of the James and John, she's normal. She's normal, looking out for her sons. But in the end, she was making a mistake. In the end, the leadership that they would exercise would change the world, but it was by blood, not power, by self-sacrifice, by their belief in Christ, and they're willing to die for Christ, for each other and the church. The blood of the martyrs, not the might of the empire, the emperor, is what changed the world. The church thrives in her role as servant of the world. She thrives when she fulfills that role of service. She serves the humanity of the world. By how? By self-sacrifice. The church by self-sacrifice in the sacraments, but it's in her teaching, in her moral life. She is a witness to the love of God to the world by her willingness to shed her blood, the church's blood, her own blood, for the good of humanity, for the good of the world. Not power, self-sacrifice.